anyone have any questions on the previous homework before we start with our little lesson here? Nope.
You post the link?
Yeah, I did. On the announcements. So we're just going to go over a couple things that would be helpful for the current homework. So Kieran's going to talk about scales and axes. I'm going to talk about some inputs or HTML inputs, like buttons and dropdowns, and then Open's going to end with events. So linking some of the HTML inputs with events to these links. Okay.
Did you share the link?
Yeah.
Okay, so like on the Slack channel, you have a link for a code pen collection which has 2 files. So one of them is scales and axis one. So we'll start with that. So I will just show a really simple demo on how to use scales in D3 and how to use those scales to generate your axis and add it to your scatter plot. So like first, right now I have commented all our JavaScript code and we'll build this line by line. So first we have a really simple body tag. Like, can everyone see this or?
Actually, it's not standard.
Okay. So let's
Actually, always pronounce it light because it's kind of reflected
lines. Is it better? Is it better?
Can you increase the font a bit?
On.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
So yeah, so here we have like a very simple HTML code snippet. We just have a SVG with a width and a height preset here. I have added a simple rectangle with just a height and a width, and I have this rectangle is here just to show you what's the boundary of our SVG. And then I have an empty group element which will be which will house our entire scatter plot. So I've ID'd this group element as a scatter plot. In the JavaScript part, like this SVG part has all the stylings for the borders and the rectangles and everything. And in the JavaScript part, we just have a variable called data which has a list of points with their x and y positions. So like this is just a long list, and I couldn't figure a better way to just have this. So now it's part of JavaScript. So we uncomment the first 2 lines, which are just the dimensions for x and y. So our actual final scatter plot will be 600 pixels wide and 450 pixels in height. So I'm just declaring this as variables in the start so we can reuse them. So even in your homeworks, it's a good idea to define this height and width values once, so you don't copy the number again and again. And if you have to change something, you just do it once. So I start with declaring what's my size, what will be the final size of my visualization. Then I will uncomment this. So what I'm doing here is I'm selecting my scatter plot group, which selecting the group with the ID scatter plot, and then I'm just transforming it. So there is this complicated transform function. Like the translate has some calculations I'm doing. So as you see, the height of the scatter plot is 500 pixels and the width height of the switch is 500 pixels and the width is 1000. So what I do is I translate my group element. Initially, the group element here is in this origin, like on the top left. What I do is I translate it along x-axis or translate it horizontally to 500 pixels minus whatever my dimensions of plot will be, so that my scatter plot will be centered horizontally. And I do the same thing vertically. So since the height is 500, I translate it 250 to the bottom, and then I subtract the height of my actual scatter plot what I've planned. And having declaring this height and width earlier allows me to reuse them easily. So next, let's append an empty rectangle with the height and width of our plot and just see what will be the final position. So when I save this and it rebuilds, this gray box will be where our final scatter plot is going to be. So we can see it's nicely centered around. And you can do this, like create empty groups for all your charts in the homework, center, like use transform to center them, and then start adding content to it. It makes it easier to move things around. Okay, so after creating this, now this is this is something we did not use in the last homework. So if you remember the last homework, we had this solar system example where I was using a lot of scales. So we will take a look at that again, but here what I'm doing is I'm creating two scales, a scale for x-axis and a scale for y-axis. So in this case, my scatter plot is not a perfect square, so I have to use two scales. And what the scales do is basically they map your data space to a pixel space on your screen. And the way you do it is you call d3 dot scale linear or whatever type of scale you want, and then you need to pass in then you need to pass in two configurations, a domain and a range. Domain is basically your data space. So right now, because I have hard coded this data, I know my scales, the data goes from 0 to 100. So I just hard code in a domain as, so the domain takes in a list of two elements. The first element is always the minimum, the second is the maximum. So I say my domain is going to range from 0 to 100, and I want to map that domain to pixel space of 0 pixels to whatever my x width of my scatter plot is, which is dot dimension x. So declaring width and height again is really helpful in this case. The same thing I do for y. I go from 0 to 100, but for y-axis, I plot, instead of asking it to plot from 0 to plot dimension y, I do it the other way around, because the y origin in SVGs is from top to bottom, not bottom to top. So this is one thing you have to be careful about. Next, I do the standard D3 syntax, circles, plot dot select all circle dot data. I connect the data and then do a join on circle, and I save this to a variable just called circles, and then I start. So you can use enter, exit, update, all the D3 bindings, but I just use join to make it simpler. And this is where we start adding attributes. So first you add a CX property, which you, so the CX property is derived from the X value in our data. So we have X values, and then the way you use your scales is you pass in your d dot x to the x scale function, and whatever is the return value is the pixel position of that point. This you do the same for cy, and here we have an attribute radius, which is the radius of the circle. Let's say you are planning on creating a scatter plot where the size of the circles encode another value. You can use a similar syntax to bind this to something else. We will go back to our solar system example where the size of the circle is bound to the size of planets. So now here you can see that here this is the dinosaur plot, or this is the dinosaur dataset which I mentioned in the class. This is a similar dataset and is converted, and you can see that it's a fairly good looking dinosaur. If you play around with the width and height, like you end up with a lot of distortions. Like I tried using a perfectly square scatter plot. Usually you don't want your scatter plots to be rectangles unless your data demands it. Otherwise, it looks as if the data is spread along one axis, which might not be true. So it's always good to have a square representation of scatter plots. But here, just to make it look good, we are not using a square representation. Then the one thing in this assignment you have to do different from the first homework is you have to add axis to the plot. So the way to, like T3 already provides us axis functions. So it can calculate axis based on the scales you have, and all you have to do is like create some empty groups for the axis. So here I'm creating an x-axis group, which is just an appended G element. I give it a class called x-axis. This is exactly, we don't need to give this class here because we are saving it as a variable, but it's a good idea to give your axis groups class so that you can style them consistently in your CSS directory. Here we are not actually styling anything, but it's a good idea. Then I have to, like, for my x-axis, I have to translate my x-axis to the bottom. Like by default, if I, so like I'll show you what happens if we don't translate this now, but right now let's assume we are translating our x-axis to the bottom, and then we actually create our x-axis. So I'm incrementing the x-axis. So what we do is call the d3.axis bottom function. So d3 provides us 4 axis functions: axis bottom, top, left, and right. And you can generate all sorts of axes using this. And the input it takes is the scale. Whatever scale you defined earlier for x-axis, you just pass that scale, and just once you do this, the next step you do is take your x-axis group, use the dot call. Dot call is basically a JavaScript function. You say x-axis group dot call and pass in the x-axis, whatever this x-axis scale you generated. So if we see the output now, we have x-axis appended here. So what happens if I don't actually have this transform? So if I don't have this transform, the x-axis is by default appended to top of the SVG because everything is appended in the top left origin of the group. And that was the reason why I used this empty group element and translated it in the beginning. So now I don't have to individually translate each element to the center. I just translate my group, and everything else uses the group as an origin. So yes, let's put this back. And next, we follow similar steps to create a y-axis scale. We say, since the y-axis we want is on the left, we say we use d3.axis left, pass in the y scale, and just use y-axis group.call, and we have a y-axis here. So using like drawing scales and axes in Tree is pretty straightforward. If you look at it, it's just like 4 added line of code you need. So that's one of the biggest features T3 has. Like if you actually have to create this axis by hand, you would need to generate the exact positions. You would need to draw one line for the actual axis line, then like these smaller tick lines, then actual labels position them, but D3 axis function does that fairly well. You can use the x and y axis classes here we have and style them. So if you want, you can increase the font size, you can change the colors, you can do a lot of things using this. We can actually go back to yeah, let's go back to Chen, can you open the observables we had last time? It has some other examples of schemes.
The ones that we.
Yep. I don't know where you have it stored. Is this readable? Increase the font size a bit. So in the last example we saw this uses a lot of axes. So here we are encoding a lot of data. So first is the position of the planet. Second is the size of the planet, represents the represents the radius of the individual circles. The size, like the distance from sun, represents the orbit. So if we go here, we have fair number of scales. So let's see where the scales. Okay. So the first scale we have is the planet size scale, which is basically a linear scale which maps the diameter of Mercury to the diameter of Jupiter and ranges from 5 pixel to 20 pixel. This is like a large. This is a fair amount of hard coding I did to make sure the plot looks good. Usually in your data calculations, you would, instead of specifying the size of Mercury directly here, I would do something like d3.min and pass in an array of all the planet sizes. So the minimum size is calculated even if your data is updated. The same goes for max. And range usually is hard coded. Instead of saying 5 to 20, I would have variables for like minimum planet size or maximum planet size if I used it somewhere else. Then here we have another scale, distance from the sun scale. This scale is not a linear scale. If we look at our raw data, you can see the distance from sun. It starts from 57.9. I don't know the unit. It's hopefully really large, but then it increases to 5,906. And if I use the scale linear, and if you look at the distribution, there is almost half the data is less than 2,500, and there are only 3 points which are greater than 2,500 or 3,000. So if I just use a linear scale, like we would have large amount of, like most of the planets clustered in this region, and then the last two planets clustered somewhere here. So we use an exponential or a power scale. Here, if there is an directly, you can use an exponential scale directly where the exponent is e. But here I'm using a custom power scale. I experimented with this value to use a value of 0.1. If I use 0.26, which is somewhere similar to our regular exponent, we have this. I have to run this code again. Run this, and then this. And we see like the planets don't seem as equally spaced. Yeah, like this is probably not. This is not probably not the true representation. And let's try using a linear scale here. What happens if we use scale linear and remove this exponent? We end up with this, right? Till we reach Jupiter or Saturn, everything is like really closely spaced, and after that Pluto is just somewhere far away. Which, like, this is probably a true representation because it's a linear scale, but it's not good. Like sometimes when you have data with few points which are really outliers, but you still want to show them, you have to use some logarithmic or exponential scaling to visualize that kind of data. And yes, and that's pretty much it on the scales. And let's see if we have anything with colors. Yep, no, that's pretty much it for scales. There are a lot of different scales. You have ordinal scales which return non-continuous values. You have some color scales. You can play around with these functions, but we will learn how to use them more as we come across more assignments and labs. Do you have any questions with using scales and axes or anything we have covered up till now? Yep.
So one thing I was noticing when I was playing around with this scale function, you find like the SVG size, and then you say that you want your scale to be between your SVG size, for example. I was noticing that when it did that, it ended up making the dimensions slightly bigger.
Dimensions for the SVG?
Yeah, or the dimensions of the transformation dimension. So you have like your x's 1, 2, and 3, and then you scale that to be in between 0 and 600. And when it does that, it actually makes it slightly larger than.
Are you using, like, is there another manual scale function like a CSS scale function applied to it?
I don't think so, but maybe. I mean,
Are you just talking about the groups, like?
So it's basically taking that Ascombi quartet 1. And
are you talking about the size of this entire like rectangle group increases slightly?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it does because it needs space for this access labels, right?
Okay.
Like technically your SVG size we defined was just from this position to this position, but now it added this axis labels and ticks on the side, so the size of the group overall increases slightly. That's the reason I added this gray rectangle on the background. So like the gray rectangle is the true scatter plot, and everything else is just taking up white space around it. But if you still are not clear, like I can probably in my office hours I can take a look at your code and figure out what's going on.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else? Okay. So next, Jen will go over how to use HTML inputs.
Yeah. So you might have noticed, who hasn't started homework 3? Good sign. So you probably noticed that there's a couple little additions for added functionality in the homework. And should be some kind of drop box and a checkbox. So we're going to talk a little bit about inputs. And because I believe you were supposed to just use JavaScript for the staircase, I just focused, I'm not using any D3. So I'm going to briefly go over how to select something, and then just some functionality. Basically, you can create these input elements, and then you can find functions or select them, and then apply functions. Have a little event on click. I'm not going to talk about events because Ilkin is going to elaborate on the events, but I'll show on click because it's really hard not to talk about a button. So, first example are some buttons. I had these styled just because I wanted to make it a little more fun. Just like in the previous homework, we have an on hover. So basically what I did is I just hard coded these in HTML, created a button. You can specify the type. You could have submit, reset, or button types for button inputs, but we won't really go into that because that's more for form submissions. But so we created our buttons, we gave them a class. They obviously need text, so basically it would be a tag just like a div that you specify the button. And then you can put whatever you want in here. So I'm just going to say whatever. What I've done is for one of these buttons, the first one, I've added, so you're probably familiar at least a little bit now with the D3 selections. We talked about it in last lab. We have D3 select all, D3 select. Select all is like all of the elements within that scope based on whatever selector you have, or select, which you would generally use for an ID because you know there's just going to be one. Well, in JavaScript, in the document methods, you can do the same thing. We have query selector here. So what I'm doing is query selector, and there's query selector all, is you can specify whatever selector, whether that's an element tag or a class. Because I know there's only one class, one button that has that is class green, I'm using query selector. So what I'm taking the green button, I'm selecting it from our HTML, and then I'm applying a function to it. So we can see what it does. What I'm doing is I'm just manipulating the DOM based on the button input. So I applied a function based on a click here in the JavaScript, but you can also do that just right here. Can you guys see that highlighting? So basically, the second button, our orange button, is like binding a function to an on-click event, if that makes sense. So I've done the same thing 2 different ways. Does that make sense, everyone? It's kind of personal preference what you want to do. But yes. Does anyone kind of think of where you can apply that in your current homework?
So in the homework for mapping a button to a particular functionality, right?
Yeah.
Are we supposed to do it within JavaScript or can we encode it within HTML?
And like the actual function?
Yeah. I mean, I can do on-click basically on HTML as well as I think it's like add then listener or something which basically looks for a particular one and passes a function to it.
Yeah.
So is there specification that we have to do it in within JavaScript or is it okay if we encode it in HTML?
From what I understand from the instructions, you have the choice aside from D3. So yeah, if you want to put it directly as I did right here for like, say something, you can do that. Yeah, or if you want to do it with a query select, you can do that as well. Or if you want to use an event, which Ilkin will talk about, you can do it. Yeah. So then checkboxes. And basically, we're not going to get too fancy with these. It's another input type, specified type checkbox. And then you have an associated label and an input. And what I did here is you can manipulate, where is it? Okay, it's just kind of stretched out. Okay. So what I've done here is I've just specified a property in the HTML that is checked. So I can do this for this one. It should reflect down here. Or obviously, you can check these. You can also add an event to that. If I were recommending stuff, I'm not going to go into detail, you can have on change on the entire thing. That works. Or like on select. So going down to our final thing, dropdowns. And feel free, I don't know if you guys are familiar with code pens, but what I would recommend doing is just going through the examples and just manipulating stuff as you go. If you want a little more detail about selectors, specifically document methods for selecting things, that Mozilla, I can post the link afterwards, is really helpful as a reference. Just understanding you get a lot of different inputs, there's different parts to the web API that you want to reference as you're building stuff. And it's like, oh, does this have this kind of property, or do I need a value for this? That's really helpful. So I actively use that when I'm building stuff. But going down to dropdowns, so basically I'm doing the same thing in two different ways. This is the harder way by just making my own dropdowns with CSS. Or you can have a select element. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the select element. So basically, it is just a tag that you specify, select, that you can append options to, and those take text. But you can also specify a value for it. So maybe we can just kind of go through a little example here that I wrote down. So I want to, I'm going to put an ID on this, so it'll make it easier to select. I'm going to call it my select. Okay. And I'm going to so I've selected with JavaScript. Let's say I want to create an element, and I'm not using D3. I can create the element, which is kind of weird. I'm not appending it to anything yet, I'm just creating it. So I want to create an option. And then I want to append, let's see, I'm going to give it a value. Not very creative there, so I'm just going to call it my value. I select. It should show up in our little drop down. There we go. Another thing, this isn't as important of a detail as far as the homework, but if you wanted to, something new I learned this morning that I didn't know about selects, is that you can actually specify, so we have a drop down, right? We just can see one option at a time. We can actually adjust the size to a little window. We get a scroll, or we could do kind of go through. Not very necessary for the homework, but kind of a little fun thing. So we kind of touched on the events. Basically what we're doing is we're creating these inputs for functionality that we can add into our applications. And then once we are able to select them, we can then find functions to them. Or we can use events, which is what Elizabeth talked about. But before I go, does anyone have any questions with that? Right now? No?
Can you just scroll up to the declared option again?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And this, I just added it as the link to this code pen, or the collection of code pens, on the announcements. And so what really helped me learn stuff is just like, I would take examples and I would just like adjust things. So you can add your own options, you can check things, you can change the CSS. I didn't really go into this dropdown because I like to make my own little dropdowns, but basically what I'm doing is I'm creating divs, and then within this div, these are links, link tags, and then I just specify that I don't want them to show until I click on the actual, what is now a button. But yeah, so you can go into more detail with that if you'd like, not necessary for the homework. If I were you, I would probably use select just because it's more straightforward. It's like less fidgeting around the CSS. Let Ilkin take over. You need to connect to. Yeah. You want to join? Yes, Slack first. Okay. Cool. Okay. It's right here. I'm not sure. So, do you want to hear it again? So if you just go to this thing, and then just mirror it over that this way. So, cool.
guys, I used the computer before just now. So yeah, so you guys know what is event-driven programming is. So basically, I mean, sure you can like do everything in parallel, but on a modern computer, what we do, like almost everything is kind of based on event-driven programming. So by event, we mean like, for example, anything that you do with your mouse, touchpad, or keyboard is triggers an event on your laptop, whether you are like know it or listening to it or not. So it always triggers that event. And it's very important when we try to visualize something because it basically with event-driven programming we can add interactivity to our visualization, and then you can do crazy stuff. So far Jen has added some interactivity here. I think she added something to change the color. So there are a couple of ways of adding events in JavaScript. So basically the one is basically the native DOM API, and the other one is like the Qt or the like some other libraries such as jQuery. So that is anymore. But so the first thing is you have to select the element that are appended, and there are a couple of ways of selecting them in JavaScript, which I put a link here so you can probably go and check from Mozilla's website. And then one simple way is just saying query selector. But what query selector does is you give it basically CSS selector, and then based on that, it goes and selects on the first one. So here, for example, we say button and then green, dot green, which means that go and select the button which has the class green added to it. And then we also do the same thing for the blue button. And then we add events to it. So there are a couple of ways of adding events. One is basically the on attribute, which is basically like the oldest and simplest way of doing it, but it's kind of real limited. Yeah.
I never increased the font. But it should just be, if you go to.
Maybe one side start.
Is that better?
Yeah, basically then we'll say all active attributes goes to some function. Here what we do is basically we change the background color, and then the blue button is should bring it back. So the query will basically save it, and then
This hashtag FFF, like, does that mean default or is that a specific color?
So
it's for white. So it's like I mean it's not code of white. So
it's like shortened.
yeah, and then just like
We found out that.
yes, and then it's like the button that we added to and it kind of generates out a lot of colors, and then like change the background color and just shoot things back. So yeah, and I know there's like the other way is like the most efficient way of using selectors is just give it an ID, a unique ID, so that and then use the ID to select it. So what we have here is we basically, and the native way of doing is document.get element by ID. You can say dd.select and then hashtag and then give the ID. So it's almost the same thing. And then we have another function called alert bit, which does just basically building up a pop-up to us. So, and in the previous one we used like the dot on click to append the function to append add the event, but right now we'll use another method which is called like add event listener here. So what it does is it first takes the first argument is name of the event. So event can be, and there's a whole list on this link. You can go and pause that website, but and the total events can be like the simplest one is click, right click, double click. Actually, there's no event for double click. And then it can be like a keep this down or like zooming in, scrolling, like anything you can think of a mouse or a keyboard can do. So just give the name first and then give the function that we will call when this event is triggered. So here we have And then here what should happen is when I click on the org button, basically I should get a pop-up. So, and then you have in your homework, you have to do it as like the with the domain API. So page and then basically when we click on it, then we basically pop up here, and then we also have another event with kind of the console work here. You can see it here. And we can also remove the events if you like it. Say you added it and then after a while, and then let's say user changed some option or something happened, and then you don't wanna use it anymore. You can also say document that, and then remove event listener, which will do the opposite of it, and then you'll not have the event anymore. So I think it's basically like real simple. Just you add event or remove event, and we'll mostly use add events. So that should be it for the homework. And then the events that you can do is like change, and the change or when you change the select like drop downs, or we can say click. Then we click on like the swap button on homework. And then we'll look at the checkboxes and selectors and see if we can actually get the actual current value. So here we first select the checkbox with current selector. What it will do, it will select only the first one, since it's just like, it feels like query select all, then it will select all of them, but it's just as a one of them. So here what we want to do is we'll add. Okay, we'll first want to check if it is checked or not. It says it's going to be true or false. So you say we select it here, and then if you just say the checkbox but checked, it will give you return true or false. So you should be able to use it, and then based on that one, decide whether you're going to upload the random data or not in the homework. I think it will provide that. And then we'll actually add another event which says change. When basically you change the checkbox, it should print whether it's like checked or unchecked. So don't do it for the first one. Then do it here. So it basically wants to like change it or click on it, and like it will print you the correct value. So you can do the same thing for the options, that the selected options drop downs, like not fancy ones but other ones. So what we're gonna do is first, it's again same step to select it here, and then we first print the correct value. Just that value should give you the value, and then I will basically console local value, add an event, and once I change it, I will basically print on the current value. So this is our drop down. I select option one, the first default one, print it in, and then as I change it here, it should give me the selected option. And now we'll try to change some attribute. Here we draw basically simple two rectangles in SVG, just and then in your homework you will need to modify the attributes with the JavaScript rather than using the tree. So the one way of doing it is basically select it, and then you say here basically select it as we did before, just select it, and this will only take the first one, and we say set attribute, which is very similar to that attr thing in the D3. So for example here we'll basically go and set the x value of the first one to 14. So
could you repeat what the query selector does?
the query selector is basically selects the first one, the first rectangle. And I added the two rectangles there, And the query selector all selects the first one, but if you want to select all of them, you can say query selector all, then it will give you a list, an array, then you can iterate over it and then set the attributes.
It's like D3 select.
Okay.
It works really similar to D3 select.
Yeah.
It works, yeah, it's like really, really similar.
Yeah.
So when people are doing development in D3, do you end up having to do a lot of things in JavaScript and then a lot of things in D3?
It is also JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
What's that?
I mean, it is also JavaScript library, right? Well, the thing is, D3, you probably like if you go and look at the implementation of like the selector, like the events, they probably use the DOM API, right? It's kind of wrapping around for the DOM API, but the thing is, you're gonna like keep everything in a like a similar structure, code structure. If you're using D3, then you can just always use like D3 select, D3 dot select all. But I mean, it's like good of this ones. Like sometimes it's saying you some other library or something good. If you want to do something real simple and you don't just have your code base. Yeah, but in the background, it's you probably use the query selector or other APIs from the native domain API. So
I added the query selector from the Mozilla reference to the announcements, just kind of like different things that we talked about, so you guys can look at it. They have examples on there.
it is actually like query selector, and then get the element by ID again, get the element by class name, get the element by tag name. There are like lots of things that you can check based on like Mozilla's website, but I mean, we mostly use it this week, so
Just nice to know.
yeah.
What's behind them.
So yeah, we have basically two rectangles appended them, and then see like it's kind of like we only selected the first rectangle here, and then moved it to like the x value moved it to 40. So the thing is like you're gonna need to do the same thing with your first bunch of like the insert thing. So you have to set the attributes with the HTML with JavaScript as I using this. So this will be helpful there. Yeah, I think we actually do. And then here we use select all. So here, for example, I mean, and this query selector all is similar to the select all. But the thing that this actually kind of be hard than select all because here you have to basically this gives you a list, an array, and of the elements. For example, this will give you like a list which has left two rectangles, but then you will have to iterate over it and then attach the events to every single of them. But running the tree, but you will just say on like when this event happens and then automatically apply to all of them. So here, for example, we basically say when you mouse over the rectangles, I will just change the border width, and then when I move my mouse out, it should set it back to 0. So let's see, like that doesn't happen. So yeah, as you can see, like kind of attach the event, like two events, mouse over, mouse out, and then we basically change the border colors. And then, yeah. So, and last thing is about kind of, do you remember what we had basically with D3 and attach the data and enter everything. So the data should be attached to the rectangles themselves, right? So the last line I will already say this is my rectangles, and I say rectangles equal to this, and then it should like two rectangles there. And what I do here is I basically attach an event, a click event by using D3. So remember the rectangles are right now a D3 selection, and this is how you attach the event inside D3. You say dot on, and then you give the event name, and then you basically give your function. And the first parameter is always the data attached to the element itself, and the second parameter is the index. You probably know that one. So, and here so we have rectangle dot on click, and it should basically print the console the d value which I give above. So right now I don't have them. Just refresh it, and then when I click, it should print me the bit right. I think you have like something similar on this. So the scattered floor, so we have to do that.
So there is a track attaching the two different kind of events to T3 and then the JavaScript events.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so is that considered JavaScript, that last part, or is that considered?
That one's T3.
T3 because kind of remember above there we.
Because you mentioned like in the homework you want to do it in JavaScript. So with that would be like having to do the
I mean this T3 because above there we say rectangles equals to T3 dot something, right? So it's kind of with T3 and then if you basically say like rectangles dot on, then you're using like the method from T3, but you are rather just use pure JavaScript, then you should use like document that add event listener or I mean first select it, document first select and then say add event listener or yeah, just add event listener.
so for the homework should we use the event listener or should we use this click?
I think it depends on the part. Like some parts it says just use pure JavaScript, in some parts you can use statistically. So
So if it says JavaScript, don't use do
yeah, correct. You should use DOM APIs. Just create a selector like or add event listener. So
Off the top of my head, the staircase one.
yeah,
big
it's
ones.
pure JavaScript. So the
Yeah.
first part is pure JavaScript. So.
But it's like part 4, the more events. I'm not 100% sure.
Sorry, what was it?
Part 4. I'm not sure what's legal.
I think someone asked about that on Slack,
Okay.
and he actually said that he just didn't want you to use CSS.
Oh, that's it.
It says using JavaScript, and someone's like, well, can we use D3? And he was like, yeah, it's just supposed to be not with CSS covered. So, yeah, just sort of like,
Yeah, somebody even asked, they've asked about using plugins, like a T3 plugin, that improves package resolution.
Any questions? Have you guys started? Who has started, for example?
This is much more fun than last week for me.
Yes.
I feel like the recursion was, at least for me, I remember doing that homework and I was suffering a little bit. So that was maybe recursion. That was the hardest part for me.
The next one is much more fun. So
Yeah, it'll be good.
Wait, it's more fun. Like, are you serious? Or are you just kidding?
It's I think it's what we do every other week. So we're gonna have a little bit bigger homeworks going forward. So this is homework 3. I
do
think
you want to say teaser?
should we show it to
Do you have it?
you?
I mean, we'll keep right with videos. So.
So there is a homework due next Friday, right? That was homework 4.
I think so.
And then after that, it's every 3 weeks? Every 2 weeks?
Homework 4 I thought was supposed to be 2 weeks.
Yeah, it should be too big.
Yeah.
It's much harder.
So yeah, we should double check. Actually, we can just do that right now.
But yeah, then the next one is like 3 weeks.
Because from what I heard from like, I feel like yeah, it should be 2 weeks. So we'll definitely double check that. Yeah, we should switch that.
Yeah. I mean, we haven't released it yet.
Yeah, we can. We'll ask.
So that's teaser.
We should. I'm trying to think of. I have it. I don't have it on this computer. Yeah.
It's like you never changed since 2008. So.
Yeah. Do we have any individual ones?
You also have the video actually.
I should know. I made this homework.
Whoa.
Oh, I'm just
So
gonna fix the
fun.
pattern. So it's a little bit bigger, but oh, there's a video. So weird. What is going on?
I don't know.
This is
years harder, or is it like same difficulty?
I'm trying to think of, so last year was the first year that we had this homework for. It was the Gapminder. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Gapminder. But it is a scatter plot basically of like world health data and how it changes through time. So there's just more, there's more to it. There's just more content and there's more, so basically, you're going to learn about map projections. I think I'm actually teaching that lecture. I'm going to teach you about map projections, and then you're going to use that to implement this world map, and you're going to create the scatter plot. But yeah, there's just more components. I would say it was harder for people last year because I built it and then gutted it, and there were a couple things that were a little confusing with it. Because of the way it's like, how much do you leave in, and then how much do you take out, and then how people build and still have it like working, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's gonna be bigger and it's gonna take more time. So I would definitely, like, even though it's 2 weeks, I would definitely start like when you get it.
Like this
So, yeah, like whenever we release the thing, we're gonna update. Okay, cool. Well, tomorrow then. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about what we went over? Like this, any questions like this homework or?
I don't know if it's the right place to ask, but when I do kind of actually try to map the button kind of to the function directly with JavaScript. So when I had a global